Hello Internet, it's Gorikowski, and today we'll be exploring the Call of Cthulhu adventure, Doorway of the Gods. Written by Ben Burns, the scenario appears in the 2020 collection A Time for Sacrifice, which is 5 1920s and 30s adventures that are centered around Mayan culture, ruins, and cities throughout the Yucatan, central Mexico, and Honduras. Another of the scenarios, Egg Out of Time, I've previously reviewed. Doorway to the Gods is the 5th and the final adventure in the collection, but if keepers are wanting to run them in a sequential order like in a campaign, it would be the 3rd adventure. The scenario itself is just 27 pages, but once you remove the maps and all the handouts and everything, it's really only 18 pages long. It's set in 1928 in Honduras at the archaeological dig site of Copan, which I'm probably mispronouncing that. It was a major city centuries ago, but suffered a rapid population decline going from about 20,000 to about 5,000 people very suddenly somewhere around the 9th century, and then by the time the Spanish explorers found it, the city was all but abandoned. This adventure reveals the reason why that happened. The scenario was far more action-heavy than most Call of Cthulhu adventures are. In fact, I feel this one is far better suited for Pulp Cthulhu because there is a lot of combat in this adventure. Characters are going to need some pretty decent fighting skills, especially in rifle and possibly submachine gun. Otherwise, keepers, you might really need to tone this combat part of the adventure down quite a lot just to keep it survivable in any way. One interesting feature about this collection is its use of Mayan symbols. Each scenario features a portion where Mayan engravings are going to be encountered, and players can use a handout key in order to decipher them, which can be pretty fun if this gag is done sparingly. Now, Egg Out of Time, it used the translation gag just a little bit too much, so all that time that we spent trying to translate everything, it started becoming a bit tedious. Now, this adventure, however, it was a lot more restrained with doing the translations, meaning that it was still pretty interesting to do without wearing out its welcome. Now, for full disclosure, I did not run this adventure myself. I played it under John Hook with the Modern Mythos podcast, but once we were finished playing it and I got to talk with John about what all he changed and his reasons for those changes, and then I got to read the adventure for myself, I have several criticisms and suggestions for any game masters out there who might want to run this adventure for their own groups. And I'm Jack the NPC. Now, normally I'm here to give it to you from a player's side of things, but since Seth's already got that one covered for this adventure, I'm mostly here just to tell jokes and shoot some bad guys. But first, a word from our sponsor, World Anvil. Whether you're making a tabletop campaign or writing a novel, World Anvil is the all-in-one world-building software suite. You can organize and manage your world by tracking and linking your locations, your timelines, cultures, races, characters, histories, joining everything together for easy access. You can link these into interactive maps, giving you all the information you want in one location, going from this continent to this region inside of it, to this particular city, to this specific building, to this character inside that specific building. You can also plot out relationship and diplomacy webs of how various character factions stand with one another, rivalries and alliances, and how they all link together, and not only keeping yourself organized, but giving yourself opportunities to discover new potential links, and also in a way that's also shareable. If you've ever tried explaining your campaign or your novel world to somebody and they just get completely lost with all the histories and the factions and all the information that you're just shotgun blasting at them, World Anvil is how you can share your world in a way that is easy to understand and explore. So just go to the link below to worldanvil.com and enter the promo code SETH for 51% off any annual subscription and get started world building. And now back to the video. But before we keep going, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here, but send your game masters this way to see about running this adventure for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, Nguzu will devour your mind. Okay, keepers, let's do this. The setup is that the player characters are hired by Miskatonic University's archaeology department to assist with the dig that's already going on down in Honduras. Now, while the player characters might be archaeologists or other academics themselves, because this adventure is so action-oriented, I'd suggest that half, if not all of the player characters are also being sent as some sort of support. The leader of the dig, Dr. Neil, mentioned in one of his reports that some of the locals are giving them trouble, so the player characters could be delivering supplies to the base while also offering protection to the archaeology team that's already down there. The adventure opens up at Boston Harbor. The characters are loading up onto a steamer, the Unicorn, to carry the player characters down to Honduras. Now, this is presented as a long read-aloud as Dr. Morgan from Miskatonic University shakes their hands and wishes them a good trip. And apart from a psychology check to detect that something is bothering Dr. Morgan, there really isn't anything that the players do here. We then hop forward 5 days as the Unicorn reaches Miami. Again, we get a long read-aloud section. The player characters receive a telegram from Dr. Morgan that Dr. Neal at the dig site hasn't been heard of from in several days, and there is an airmail package that is on their way that can give them more information.
Oh, well, I guess we'll just have to wait for it then. No big deal.
Unfortunately, the captain wants to leave Miami right away once the boat has been provisioned. No rolls will dissuade him from this, and the module suggests that it would require sabotaging the engine or holding the crew at gunpoint as the only means to get the crew to wait. Now, this part just makes no sense to me. Why wouldn't a hard persuade or intimidate or other role work here? I mean, that's quite literally what those skills are for. Or why not a bribe? Can't we just bribe the captain in order to stay a little bit longer? I mean, this boat was chartered by Miskatonic University specifically for bringing the player characters down to Honduras, so if the player characters aren't on the boat, why would the captain have any reason to leave? I mean, they're literally his cargo that he's supposed to be taking down to Honduras. Now, you could have it where the captain, grumbles and he could say that Miskatonic is going to have to pay this extra time, but the idea that he's just immune to any form of persuasion and the player characters would have to hold him at gunpoint just seems a little bit too extreme to me. Now, the package arrives just 30 minutes after they were supposed to leave, so if the player characters can't get the Unicorn to wait, they'll see the delivery guy just running up the docks, and it can allow a hard social roll to get the captain into going back so they can get the thing, which would have taken longer than the whole time if they just stayed there in the first place. But it at least allows a roll this time, but it's at a steep cost because it requires it be a hard roll. It does remind the keepers about spending luck here, but all of this just seems pointlessly difficult. Now, I'd recommend just toning this portion down quite a bit, just simply being able to bribe or talk the captain into staying with a simple roll. The whole time he can be complaining about, the tides or maybe some of the cargo or produce that he's going to be carrying down to Honduras, before it goes bad or anything like that. But certainly nothing that requires the player characters to have to pull a gun on a guy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, breaking the engine or pulling a gun on the captain? Yeah, it is pretty difficult to believe that the captain would even agree to take the player characters anywhere after that. And if he did agree to take the player characters somewhere after that, it's pretty difficult to believe that those player characters wouldn't end up getting lost at sea along the way. You know what I mean? This ain't like you're being mean to your server and your server spits in your food. Nah, this is like being a jerk to your sea captain and end up getting eaten by crabs.
Opening the package, the player characters discover a letter from Dr. Morgan saying that they haven't heard from Dr. Neal and his team in 7 days, which they're supposed to be reporting in every 2 days. The package also contains all of Dr. Neal's telegrams, documenting everything that's happened since the dig began.
Holy crap, guys. Dr. Neal and the expedition team haven't reported back in over a week. And get this, the expedition team found some sort of hidden door or something that was surrounded by all these glyphs. And then members of the team started going missing after that. We got to find out what happened. We got to get to the bottom of this and discover whatever happened to Dr. Neal and his team. Hold on, Dr. Neal. We're coming to save you.
Okay, so what's going on here is that 11 centuries ago, a new cult began in the city of Copan, and through visions, this god, Nguzu, promised peace and prosperity and answered his followers' prayers, which is a lot more than their normal gods were doing. And then, when war threatened the city, 15,000 followers flocked to this new religion, and then, following some instructions that they had received in their dreams, they built this portal to the god's realm, this absolute paradise, and they fled to safety, leaving the city defenseless, which only 5,000 people remaining. Unfortunately, Nguzu lied. While it was a minor demigod, it wasn't one for humans, but dimensional shamblers. The Mayans were encased in these suspension chambers to slumber for centuries as their minds were slowly devoured, allowing Nguzu to create and support a massive army of dimensional shamblers now that he had all this food that he could feed them. Now, when Dr. Neal and his team opened up the doorway, they were captured, and Nguzu fed on Dr. Neal's mind and learned about the modern world and everything that's happened in the past last 1100 years. And Nguzu saw the city of New York, which held millions of minds. And Nguzu plans to construct a gateway to unleash his army of dimensional shamblers to conquer and harvest New York City, which would then be able to fuel him to continue his conquest. So, when the player characters read these telegrams, it makes Nguzu aware of them. Now, the module never explains why or how it makes him aware of them, so my suggestion here is that have Dr. Neil be somebody who is psychically sensitive, and in his suspended state, he detects the player characters reading his words. And maybe one of the player characters was like an old friend or comrade of his, and that they have a really strong bond between them. And in Nguzu, who's kind of listening in to Dr. Neil's mind, he is now aware of the player characters and that they are coming and might be some sort of trouble. So on the first day after leaving Miami, the player characters discover a crewman named Joe in their room who's reading all these telegrams. Now, if he's asked, and for some reason it requires 2 social roles instead of just a single social role, or maybe just a single hard social role, and that seems a little bit excessive to me, Joe confesses that he heard the telegrams whispering to them. My suggestion here is also have it where Joe is somebody who is psychically sensitive as well. That's why he heard those telegrams, is because he's got this little bit of the sight. Now, maybe he's somebody that's been known to have premonitions, and the crew sees him like some sort of good luck charm, and maybe that's the reason why the captain was so eager to leave Miami right away, because Joe had warned him that if they don't leave right away, he felt that something bad would happen to the unicorn if it waited any longer, so that's why the captain was unwilling to listen to any form of, demands or persuasions or anything, if you kind of add that little bit that Joe's kind of like everybody's good luck charm. Now, over the next 2 nights, anyone who read the telegrams suffers these weird nightmares. Now, Joe claims to have seen a ghostly claw reaching through the wall into the waking world to grab him. Then on the evening of the second day, Joe is snatched through a wall, and the player characters might get to see this. The captain claims that he must have jumped ship or something, but then on the third day, the player characters arrive in Honduras. Okay, so this adventure up to this point has just been a couple weird things happen to the player characters, but they really haven't done anything themselves. It's mostly a lot of long read-aloud portions with some overly difficult social roles and a little bit of sanity loss from these dreams. But it's mostly the player characters being told a story rather than interacting and really controlling anything. And all of this, I feel that we could just easily bypass altogether, just simply start this adventure off once they arrive in Honduras and kind of give them a brief summary of everything that happened, and here's a stack of telegrams of what your mission is, now go off to the dig site. Now, while I'm on this, I really wish that first read aloud portion at Boston Harbor had the date listed next to it. The fact that this takes place on March 25th is kind of buried in the text of the previous page, so I'd also like to repeat it right here for keepers to just quickly reference when they're in the middle of the game session. Anyway, when John Hook ran us through this, he completely changed this portion of the adventure up. He had crewmen vanishing every single night, and then the captain, he goes mad and he's blaming the player characters and locks the player characters in a room, and he's clearly gone crazy. And the player characters, we ended up breaking out of the room and we stole a lifeboat and made our way to shore on the last night, just kind of the dead of night once the shore was a little close to us. My suggestion for this is a bit different. So I would have the dreams be communications that are being sent to them from Dr. Neil. Once again, if we allow him to be, some sort of minor psychic. So the player characters, they find themselves in this kind of weird dream ship with passages that, kind of extend to seemingly forever. And, if they go out on deck, outside it's all gloomy and overcast, and there's this kind of weird fog in the air, and the water beneath the ship is actually just this endless sea of this dark gray mud, and the ship is kind of cutting a big furrow through this just kind of plain of mud. Now, the player characters, maybe through POW checks or listen checks, they could be able to find Dr. Neil, who's somewhere on this just kind of weird, crazy dream ship. Maybe the player characters would have to initially find each other, like they all wake up in separate rooms in different portions of the ship. And once they find Dr. Neil, if they do, he's incoherent and he's not entirely corporeal. He's trying to warn them that that he has to tell them something before it finds them. And then you can say that how he opened up this doorway and it found them, and how it wiped out Copan long ago and now it wants more. And how the player characters are all in danger and the whole world is all in danger. And then this dream ends, at least the first one, with Dr. Neil being pulled through a wall or something, and the player characters wake up covered in sweat. Maybe even have the player characters, see a dimensional shambler kind of reaching for them, and then when they wake up, there's the claws of ripped furrows in the paint right above their their heads in their beds, something like that, where they know this is a lot more than just a dream. Now, I like this idea because, first, it's a lot more exciting and interactive than what the module is currently offering, but it also gives clues to the player characters for what's in store. Now they're trying to hide from these dimensional shamblers in this kind of, dream maze ship. If they can reach Dr. Neil first, it can give them a clue or a hint on how to combat these monsters.
Oh yeah, you could have Dr. Neil in the dream world give one of the player characters some sort of weird pulsating fruit, right? And he's like, here, eat this. And then if the player character eats that weird-ass fruit and they make a power check, or maybe even a hard power check, that's how they learn the spell Bind Dimensional Shambler. Then, of course, they're going to wake up after that and find themselves holding some sort of rotted and half-eaten kiwi fruit or something, right? But that could give them a serious edge at the end of this adventure, where that player character could bind one or two-dimensional shamblers, while the rest of the player characters are facing off against dozens upon dozens more.
Arriving in Honduras, the investigators are met by a man named Jose, who was sent by Dr. Morgan to drive them to Copan. He has 3 more men with him and 2 trucks. Now, of course, if the investigators wish to telegram Dr. Morgan to verify that, this guy is legit and everything, it can take 2 hours to send and receive messages back from Miskatonic. Now, I'd recommend that once they arrive, you simply have a telegram already waiting there for them. Or maybe Joe brings it to them because he picked it up right before he got them. And, you can have it where, that Dr. Morgan tells them they still haven't heard anything from Dr. Neil and the rest of his team. The journey from Puerto Cortez to Copan is pretty uneventful, and the only thing of note is once they reach San Pedro Sula, Jose only gives them 1 hour to buy any supplies, and then he requires a persuade check in order to allow him to stay here any longer.
That don't make no freaking sense. Jose's job is to take us to Copan. That is the entire reason that he's even freaking here in the first place. It's not for him to drive to the spot, it's for him to drive me to that spot. Besides, why the rush now? It's not like we were being rushed when we were at the port, because we were totally allowed to be telegramming Miskatonic back and forth for hours, and he didn't say boo about it then. So my suggestion is you have it be where Jose has been in a rush this entire time since they met him, right? Like maybe some members of his team, or maybe himself, they got some friends or some family that were part of that expedition, and they are worried sick about them, so they want to get there and check on their friend, right? So, when the player characters, they arrive at the port, they're walking down the pier off the boat, they meet Jose right there, and he's all like, hey guys, my name is Jose, I'm supposed to take you to Copan, get in the trucks, they're already running, we gotta go now. Or you can have it be where some storm is brewing on the horizon, right? Like they can see those black thunderheads looming closer, and Jose is all like, guys, we gotta rush this last little bit, because if that rainstorm hits, those jungle roads are gonna be way too muddy for us to get through for a couple days.
Eventually, they'll reach the ruins of Copan. The archaeological camp is intact. The trucks are still there with their keys, but no one is there. Though it appears that somebody has raided the tents for any food and some basic things like pots and pans, there is no signs of any form of violence. Search of the area discovers a torn-up page talking about Dr. Neil discovering this hidden doorway that was surrounded by glyphs. Several of the expedition team had gone missing, but the local natives said that they had nothing at all to do with that. Checking the ruins discovers the stone doorway, and then with the translation handout, the player characters can get to work. On the night of their arrival, there's this huge rainstorm, and during that, one of Jose's men is taken. And then before he is being dragged around a corner and vanishing, the investigators see this huge claw reach out and grab him. Then the next morning, Jose and his 2 remaining men are resolved to find a way of opening up that door and rescuing their friend. He then opens up this crate that they brought along with him, and he pulls out this arsenal of Enfield rifles, sawed-off shotguns, Thompson submachine guns, pistols, machetes, sharp sticks, and hand grenades.
Holy crap, yeah, I'm going to take one of everything. Guys, pro tip here, if the keeper offers you a huge-ass box of guns and grenades, you better stock up.
Once the player characters manage to decipher and open up the gate, a group of tribesmen emerge from the jungle. Their intent is to reseal this gate that Dr. Neil had opened, but it's taken them several days to gather all the necessary supplies, so, they haven't been around in the past couple days, but they insist that this portal must be destroyed. The tribal elder can be talked into waiting a full day, but no more than that before he's going to go ahead and seal it, so if the player characters go through, they better be back before he seals these gates, which gives the player characters a really nice time limit, get inside and rescue any survivors, then get the hell out of there. He also offers the investigators an ointment and instructions on how to reseal this gate themselves if they need to, if they come out early and they just want to go ahead and close that up behind them. Now, stepping through the portal, the investigators emerge in a world of mud. A gray haze fills the air, and sound doesn't travel very far here. Even gunfire is muted at just 30 feet, so it's a very silent world. The adventure assumes that Jose and his men are going to charge through first. Sure, yeah, they are eager to get through there and find their missing friend, but the player characters, they should still get some sort of chance to maybe talk it out with them, try to come up with some sort of plan or anything like that, but how they're all going to go ahead and enter this thing. Now, anyway, he and his men were attacked by these huge bug things called shambler hounds. Now, they killed one of these things, but another one got away, and a few minutes later, this huge swarm of shambler hounds is going to return, 3 of them per player character, which is pretty damned brutal because these things are tough. Again, I strongly encourage that the player characters have some really good fighting skills, or the adventure might just kind of start going south right here. The adventure has it that when the player characters emerge through this portal, they find themselves next to some sort of weird stone pillar to mark where the gate is. However, when John Hook ran us through it, he changed this one a lot for the better, because when we emerged through that portal, we found ourselves as some sort of giant pyramid that looked a lot like the one back at Copan, but some sort of weird mud copy of it, right? All the corners were all kind of rounded and soft, but it was really recognizable of what it was supposed to represent. And the idea being is that for the Shamblers, in order for them to build this gate, they have to build some sort of copy of what it looks like on the other side, which is really, really cool. But also, for this opening battle scene, that now means that the player characters, they're up on the high ground as they're on top of this pyramid, and they're shooting down at all these bug things as they come swarming up the steps toward them, with just a really cool cinematic image. Kind of like something out of Alien vs. Predator. The city of the Shamblers is pretty cool. I like the fact that it's kind of like an anthill where we have this mound above this kind of elaborate tunnel system, all dug out of this weird mud. Now, the player characters, they might encounter a few dimensional Shamblers, but eventually they'll discover the stasis rooms, or the dimensional Shamblers have encased people in these sort of mud cocoons. Now, there are a few of the original residents of Copan that are still alive down here if they get all the mud off of them and they wake up. And while they're not going to be able to speak any of the other characters' languages, the Mayans are going to gladly help and follow out any humans that show up, no matter how weird they might appear to them. The player characters can also discover Dr. Neil, Sailor Joe, Jose, and his 2 men that were captured. However, the rest of the dig team is dead. Personally, I say that you have most of the Miskatonic dig team still be alive at this point. After all, the Mayans were kept alive for centuries before they started dying off. So it's only every named NPC that was captured that's still alive. So I would go ahead and keep some of those kind of nameless members of the dig team still alive. Maybe some archaeologists, some grad students, and some manual laborers that were with them. So I suggest that you have it where there are 10 members of the dig team that can be found. And then any who die during this big escape could cost the player characters 1 sand, up to a maximum, let's say 6 sand, even if all of them died. And then any of these members of the dig team that they rescue could award the player characters 1 sand, up to this maximum of 10. Now, once he regains his senses, Dr. Neil tells him that Nguzu is building a portal to invade New York City, and then with hundreds of thousands of people that it could capture, the Shamblers could draw enough energy to create a permanent portal between the worlds. So if the investigators don't stop this now, the world could be overrun with dimensional Shamblers.
Holy crap! Well, this has escalated quickly. Guys, we're gonna need some more grenades. It's time to save the world.
Venturing deeper, the player characters discover Nguzu's throne room. The Shamblers are all pushing these 4 curved pillars together, and a glowing portal to New York City is kind of appearing in the middle of all of these. Then Dr. Neil tells them that destroying the 2 of these pillars should be enough to destroy the gate. Now, in our game, John Hook changed all of this up quite a bit to where they're now making this mud recreation of Bethesda Fountain in Central Park instead of doing these 5 pillars, and then all we had to do was then dive into this mud fountain, and then you popped out in the real fountain in Central Park. Again, I really dig this idea of the mud recreations that the Shamblers are using for the gates that he came up with. Now, it's going to be 5 rounds until this gate opens. Then once the pillars are destroyed, it'll take 4 more rounds for the gate to close. Now, hopefully that's enough time for the investigators and the rescued victims to make it through. However, they're going to be facing off against a whole lot of dimensional Shamblers. You got 40 plus 10 per player character, so if you've got 10 characters, they're going to be facing off against 100 dimensional Shamblers, and then half as many Shambler hounds. This is a lot. Like, I would probably have given the player characters a full-size machine gun or 2 for this adventure, because this is a lot of extremely tough monsters that have armor, and even if you're shooting at them with a submachine gun, their armor is enough that it might kind of lower it, not enough just to kill them in one strike. So I would probably up this to a full-size machine gun. Even the most hardcore Pulp Cthulhu games where my characters are these gunslinging badasses, I would have been hesitant to throw this situation against them, and in regular Call of Cthulhu, I wouldn't throw my player characters in this situation. Now, if they distributed out any spare weapons among the NPCs, those NPCs can certainly help them out through this. Now, for this, instead of the keeper controlling, a dozen or more NPCs that are then off fighting NPC monsters, which is just boring for every single person at the table when the game master is doing something like that, I recommend that you give the players control of some of these NPCs, like break them up into little squads, and each player gets to control a couple of the NPCs here. Now, while many of them aren't going to have much in the way of fighting skills, because you got a lot of academics and some grad students here, some of these characters should have some good fighting skills. There might even be a few great war veterans among them. Maybe 1 or 2 possess skills like demolitions or something that the player characters can use. And then, of course, Jose and his remaining men are extremely capable fighters. Now, the goal here is not to kill all of these Shamblers. That I don't think that would even be possible. They don't have to kill them or they're gone. It's just to get through the portal and hopefully shatter these pillars in order to break the portal behind them. Now, even with the element of surprise on their side and a full round before the closest Shamblers can even get to them, this is going to be a brutal fight. Now, once they get through the portal, we still have several rounds where this gate remains open, and even then, it's not going to take Nguzu long to rebuild the shattered pillar and open up the gate again. So the player characters are going to have to hold off 6 Shamblers in Central Park while sealing this gate off with the ointment the tribal elder had given them, and some New York police officers are probably going to be joining in this fight in order to, replenish the NPCs that the characters have lost. Some more combatants are going to be coming in. Now, once the gate is sealed, the adventure is done. The player characters managed to save the world, but they've also made an enemy of a dimensional Shambler god who might want a little bit of revenge for that. And they can also have a lot of fun trying to explain to the authorities just what in the hell happened, but those are all problems for another day. Overall, this is an okay adventure. It's not one that I would have chosen to have run for my own group myself. I think the big actiony ending is great if you're going to be running this with Pulp Cthulhu and you've got characters who have some very, very good combat skills. And I really do like the idea of going into this dimensional Shambler world, kind of like going into the Upside Down to rescue somebody as well. I really like that, and I like the fact that they have a mythos explanation that's kind of behind the big mystery of Copan and why it was deserted. However, the module does several things that I don't like. For one, it is pretty dang railroady. And we've got this very long Game Master read aloud portions. There isn't terribly much that happens in the first half of the adventure. The player characters are on the ship. And I feel like we could summarize and skip most of all of this altogether and simply start it off once the unicorn arrives at Puerto Cortez. We have multiple times that social skills cannot be used to persuade NPCs into waiting just a little bit longer for the player characters. NPCs whose actual job is to bring the player characters to a destination, they're now threatening to leave the player characters behind and just go on without them, the same PCs they're supposed to be transporting there in the first place. It really feels like it's needless and just forced conflict to me, and I don't like it. With the final battle in the throne room, I think we should have some ways that the characters should be able to circle around behind or get close to the portal gate without having to go through this enormous horde of powerful monsters. Sound does not travel very far in this universe, so that can really aid their stealth even if they're shooting fighting bad guys because, gunshots don't sound further than 30 feet away. So you could have it where the player characters might be able to take some of the side tunnels and, come up behind this thing or, right next to one of the walls near it. And they don't have to go through this enormous horde that's in the way. Or, it starts off where the player characters are looking down on this from above. So maybe they give them an opportunity to see some passages that are near the sides of the chamber that they could then try to get to without having to cross this horde. Hell, I really like the idea that the player characters might be able to literally drop down through the portal from above, because when they first encounter the throne room, they're looking down on it, right? So maybe if they make a running and a jump roll, they can figure out a way to kind of leap down into this thing. Or if the player characters could come up with some way that they could maybe kind of go along the ceiling or something and get directly above this portal, they could simply just drop the 150 feet and just go right through it, no jump roll required. But the whole shooting through this entire horde feels very forced, and it's just, I see this as being unsurvivable with regular Call of Cthulhu characters. You can find A Time for Sacrifice on the New Comic Games website or as a PDF on DriveThruRPG, links below. Now, while I feel that this adventure really does require a lot of keeper work in order to fix all these problem areas, the collection as a whole, with all the rest of the adventures and the whole Mayan translating thing, that is definitely worth checking out.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. And a huge thank you to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Make sure you hit them up with the link below for 51% off an annual plan. Till next time, investigators, you have a great day. What I think would be really cool to do with this adventure, right? And you got to do this one with Pulp Cthulhu. It only works that way. But you have it be, we're at the end, when the player characters arrive in New York and they got all their guns and their grenades and they're battling it out with all the shamblers. Yeah, maybe some of the police show up and they join in the fight. But once that smoke clears, all the shamblers are gone because all their bodies have dissolved into goo, right? And the player characters, they're the ones holding all the guns and they find themselves getting arrested for all that stuff. And then, of course, Miskatonic's like, yeah, we paid them to go down to South America. They're supposed to be there right now. We don't know what they're doing in New York. Police, you have a day with them. So now the player characters, right, they just lost their job. They've been abandoned by the university, and they know that they're about to be going to jail for a long freaking time for saving the world. Thank you very much for that. Anyway, right when everything looks its darkest, this team of high-dollar lawyers comes walking in, and they're all like, hey, you guys don't need to worry about a thing. We're going to make sure that you get off scot-free. The player characters, they're like, why are you guys helping us? I mean, who's paying for all this stuff? And the lawyers, they're all like, we represent the Caduceus organization, and they believe your story. How'd you guys like a job? And that is how you start the Two-Headed Serpent campaign.